OBS क्या हुआ?
Yeah, I think we are live now.
Okay.
So, hello everyone. Welcome Avnish and Vipul. And as you can see from the title, आज I'm going to teach a good friend of mine, Nandini, chess from absolute scratch. अगर आपको भी chess नहीं आता, and a lot of you come on the stream and say that what game is this? How do you play? Teach me chess. तो आप ये stream देखिए, क्योंकि ये stream में we'll be learning chess from absolute scratch. Welcome Nandini to the stream.
Thank you, Mrinal.
And before we start, I mean, just you can tell us something about yourself, your chess journey, आपको क्या आता है and stuff.
First of all, thank you, Mrinal, for getting me on board. So, you are the one beginner
Can't
in chess. I don't know anything. Uh, but it was a game I was always very curious about. And you being such a fabulous chess player is the best way to learn this game. So, hopefully, I'll be able to learn something.
जरूर जरूर I mean that is our aim. I mean chess freaks में welcome आलोक भाई. हमारा aim एक ही है to grow the game of chess, and हमारा एक ही aim है that chess should go to as much audience as possible. We will also get to learn from this. Yes, Alok bhai. So I'm going to teach from absolute scratch. So jaise let's start without wasting much time. It's going to be a short stream because this is like episode 1. So ekdam basic sikhayenge. And as you can see, like I mean, you know that in a chessboard there are 64 squares. I mean, this is the chessboard as you can see. I mean, 8 into 8 ka chessboard hota hai. There are 8 8 rows. You can count, and 8 columns. हेलो सबको हेलो गाइस. एंड इफ यू हैव एनी क्वेश्चंस आप मेरे को कभी भी रोक सकते हो. And you can see over here there is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H written if you can see the screen. And when you look at the rows, and these are the columns A, B, C. And जब आप स्क्रीन देखते हो यहाँ पे आपको रोज में 1 2 3 4 दिख रहा होगा, like on the right side.
Yes.
Yeah, so when you multiply 8 into 8, it is 64 squares. So it's first important to understand the chessboard, that there are 64 squares in a chessboard, and each of the square, it has a notation. जैसे I mean when you want to know, I mean we all use Google Maps, and Google Maps में क्या होता है, when you want to know some location आप latitude longitude को आप merge करके you get the exact point. So this is also as simple as that. And before we get to each square, the first thing to remember is that जो आपका bottom right square होता है, this is always a white square, and this square that is the bottom left, ये हमेशा एक dark square होता है. Whether you call it a black square or a dark square, it is all the same.
Okay.
And now we will understand how each square is denoted on a chessboard. So जैसे कि I said, there are columns and there are rows. So to denote any square on a chessboard, you have to look at the intersection of the row and column. For example, let's say if I pick this square. So when I see the column over here, you can see that the columns are denoted by alphabets. जैसे मैंने बोला A to H. So you can see over here that this is E, 1 2 3 4 5. And ये जो square मैंने circle किया है, this, yes, like coordinates, Alok. And hello Argadeep Kulkan. And when you look at the row over here, this is number 5. So when you look at the intersection of these two, the rows and the column, this is, and we always denote the column first. I mean, ये जो column होता है, this is known as files, and the rows are known as ranks. We will come to terminologies later, but this is E and this is 5. So this square over here is the E5 square. And who is the guest today? Guys, you can see the guest is Nandini Dalmia, a good friend of mine. बहुत अच्छा darts खेलती है. I mean, I know a lot of people, they come and tell me कि आपके पीछे darts board है, are you a darts player? Of course मैंने darts छोड़ दिया है, but she is a very good darts player. अगर आपको कभी darts सीखना हो तो आप इनसे सीख सकते हो. And similarly, coming back, like for example, if I look at this square, ये होगा C because the file is C and the rank is 4. So this square is C4. So all the 64 squares you can denote, like there is a denotion, like you can denote a square. Now let me ask you, just to make sure कि आप समझे हो, like if I take this square, can you tell me what will be the notation of this square?
Yeah, I think it's G7.
Yeah, because this is G and this is 7. So I mean, a lot of people, they always get confused, no, like the first thing in chess, I mean, and you all, when you see chess games, like the chat as well as you, आपने देखा होगा that you know that when a Vishy Anand is playing chess or a Magnus Carlsen is playing, उन लोग हमेशा कुछ लिखते होते हैं, like you know when they are playing a game, they make a move and then they write something on a piece of paper. So what they write is the move that they have played. So how do you know what move you have played? I mean, when you place a piece on a particular square, so you can denote the square like this, like no, जैसे मैंने ये square mark किया है, this is E and 4. So the first thing is to understand the coordinates, जैसे कि आलोक भाई ने बोला that to denote each square you have coordinates, and this is how the squares are denoted. So I hope you have no questions on this. I mean, I can ask you a couple more, but I think that since you are not a kid and you're pretty old, so आप समझ गए होंगे.
Yeah, this is clear.
So now we will understand how to set up the board, because you know that there are 8 ranks over here, 1 2 3 4 5 6. Now जो first and second rank होते हैं, always the white pieces start from here and the black pieces start from the last 2 ranks, 7 and 8. So let us set up the board first. ये जो second rank होता है, I mean from both the sides, यहाँ पे सारे pawn setup होते हैं. So you have 8 pawns in a chess game. Each side have equal material. So I mean, this is how you set up the pawns. So on all the ranks यहाँ पे, so A2, B2, C2, D2, and ये सारे जो है, the entire second rank, it has white pawns, and the entire 7th rank, it has black pawns. Now we will see the rook. इसको बोलते हैं rook. On and both the rooks are placed on the edges of the board, and all the pieces are opposite each other. Like no, अगर एक rook यहाँ पे बैठेगा तो सामने वाला का rook भी यहाँ पे बैठेगा. So on the edges of the board you have the rooks on A1 and H1 for the white side. For the black side it is A8 and H8. Next we come to the knights. Knights rook के बगल में बैठते हैं. So there are 2 rooks, 2 knights, 2 bishops, and 1 king and queen. I'm sure आपको इतना पता होगा. So the knights sit on B1 and G1 for the white side, and for the black side on B8 and G8. Next we have the bishops. The bishops sit beside the knights. So these are all the minor pieces. I mean, the bishop and knight is known as the minor piece, and rook and queen is known as the major piece. So there are 2 sets of bishop, knights, and rooks, as you can see on both sides, and they all are placed opposite to each other. Now one more thing to notice is that जो दो bishops है, they both are on opposite colors. You have a dark squared bishop on C1 because this is a dark square, and you have a light squared bishop on F1 because this is a light square. Similarly for the black side, it's the opposite. The light square bishop is on C8 and the dark square bishop is on F8. Now comes the king and the queen. So the queen is the most powerful piece in the game. So ये जो white queen है, the queen always takes her own color. यहाँ पे सिर्फ 2 square बचे हैं, D and E, D1 E1 and D8 and E8. So the white queen will be sitting on the D1 square because ये white है and this D1 square is a white square.
Okay.
And इसके ठीक opposite will be sitting the black queen, and this is D8 square, and by default because there are even number of rows, तो ये हो गया dark square. And now finally both the kings are placed beside the queen. So this is the complete setup, like how a chessboard looks like. You have 8 pawns on both sides which take the second rank and the 7th rank for white and black, and then you have the 2 rooks sitting on the edges of the board, then the 2 knights, then the 2 bishops that are opposite colored. The queen always takes her own color, that is the white queen will be on the white square, the black queen is on the black square, and then you have the king And the king, of course, is the most powerful piece, because if you get checkmated, then you lose the game. So
Correct.
this is how the board is set up. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot.
Sure. अभी तक तो everything is clear. I think we can go ahead.
Yeah, and hello, Avnish and Amog, welcome. हमारे साथ है नंदिनी. शी इज माय फ्रेंड. शी वांटेड टू लर्न चेस फ्रॉम स्क्रैच. उनको कुछ भी चेस नहीं आता है. सो वी आई एम टीचिंग हर चेस, एंड इफ यू आल्सो वांट टू लर्न फ्रॉम स्क्रैच, स्ट्रीम देखिए. इफ यू guys also have any questions, you can ask in the chat. You can shoot questions and I'll be happy to answer all questions. So basically what we have learned is how a board is set up so far, and now we will understand how each piece moves before I end the stream, because मैंने बोला था it's going to be a short stream. So we will cover how each piece moves. So this is how the pieces are set up and the board is set up. No questions here, then we can move to the next part.
Yeah, we can move ahead.
So अभी हम देखेंगे how each piece moves. So we will start with the pawns. How long you been playing? I've been playing since childhood, Vipul bhai. So abhi, let us understand how the pawns move. So okay, let me put the black pawns here. So ये जो pawns होते हैं, these pawns, they only move straight. I mean,
Okay.
and before we go here, I mean, let us understand that there are three possible things. One is, this is like a sleeping line. You can call it like, a horizontal line, or it's called a sleeping line. And then ye jo hai, this is a vertical line, or you can say, a standing line. And then you have diagonals. I mean, there are three types of, there are three types of kya bolte, directions that you can see. Like one is sleeping line, one is standing line, and the third is diagonals. So ye jo pawn hai, it can only move forward, like it can only move in a straight line, and when the pawn is in its initial square, or you can say in its base square, जैसे हमने बोला, like we learned how the chessboard is set up. It is set up, like all the pawns on the second rank and the seventh rank. So a pawn can move either one square ahead, or it can move two squares ahead, and वो सिर्फ सीधा चल सकता है.
पीछे नहीं आ सकता.
नहीं, पीछे नहीं आ सकता. I was about to come to that point जो आपने बोल दिया, that once the pawn is here, a pawn can never move backwards. It can only move forward. Like these are the soldiers. Like in जो war में होता है, you can imagine chess as a war, like a battlefield where there are two sides, like though fighting. Chess Brilliant, she is my friend. I am not federated, and hello chess with Rix, capture with Rix. So the pawn can only move forward, and one important point to note here is that this pawn can move two squares only when it is in its base location. जैसे अभी इसने दो square चला. Now let's say black plays a move like this, because a pawn can only move one step ahead or two steps ahead. अभी ये pawn दो square नहीं चल सकता, because it can only move two squares when it is at its base location. Which means that when the pawn is over here, I mean on these squares. So abhi, let's say if white can move this pawn twice, white can move all these pawns twice. Now black can move all of these pawns that I'm highlighting over here in green. ये सारे pawns दो step चल सकता है, but the other pawns, these three pawns, these cannot move two steps now.
Got
And
it.
one more important point is that, let's say now it's white to move, or it's black to move. Black ये चलता है, white plays this. And now black cannot move this pawn ahead, because a pawn cannot jump over other pieces. I mean, ये pawn इसको ऐसे काट नहीं सकता. So how a pawn captures is diagonally. So let me show you this again. Now let's say it is white's move. White अगर ये move खेलता है, like this pawn can move twice. So now black can only capture diagonally. तो ये pawn ऐसे capture करता है. So a pawn movement is such that it can move only ahead one or two squares only if it is at its base location, and it can capture only diagonally. वो straight capture नहीं कर सकता है. I mean, if you have any questions or any doubts, I know मतलब थोड़ा fast हो गया होगा या थोड़ा confusing हो गया होगा. So if you have any clarifications, so you can ask.
So I understood that pawn is basically like your first line of defense.
Yeah, you can say it's like the first. I mean, you can say first line of defense बोल सकते हो. So basically, the pawns are over here. So when you look at the board, so I mean the point is that आपका pawn आगे चल सकता है, and it cannot capture in the same way it is moving.
So if I don't have a pawn diagonally, so they'll just stand there in this
Yeah,
position till
so I
time.
mean over here, let's say no, this e pawn इसको e pawn बोलते हैं. This e pawn cannot move because there is an obstacle. I mean, these are called as obstacles. Like, because there is this pawn over here, तो ये pawn आगे नहीं चल सकता. But let's say कि if white plays a move like this, तो अभी this pawn is free to capture this pawn because ये pawn आगे नहीं चल सकता and it can only capture diagonally. तो अभी ये इसको काट सकता है.
Acha, got it.
So this is how a pawn moves, like, and there is one more concept of on pass off which we will come later because right now I don't want to confuse you with too many things. All that we will cover slowly. And yeah, she is my friend chess brilliancy, chess सिखा रहे हैं and pass off बता दो, अभी नहीं बताएंगे, we'll move to that concepts later. Head to head opposition of pawn can't move, ऐसे बता दो. Yeah, so I mean what he's trying to say is head to head opposition, pawn cannot move and it can only capture diagonally. जैसे for example if white plays this pawn now and black plays this pawn, तो अभी ये pawn नहीं हिट सकता. This pawn can only go one square, all the other pawns can move two squares, but this pawn can only go one square and this pawn cannot move.
I understood.
Yeah, so I hope pawn movements are clear. And so I mean इसमें बस आपको एक ही चीज सीखना है. I mean, you only have to keep one rule that pawn can only move forward one or two squares and it can never move backward. So in chess, whenever you move any pawn, you have to be very careful because you have to understand कि अगर आपने ये pawn चल दिया first move, so ये pawn अभी पीछे कभी नहीं आ पाएगा in the entire game. It can only move forward. पीछे आप नहीं आ सकते. एंड सेम विद ब्लैक, इफ ब्लैक मूव्स दिस पॉन, ये कभी पीछे नहीं जा पाएगा. सो
So
पॉन्स कैन,
what should your first move be? If suppose
we'll
I
come
am
to
the
all
one.
that later. I mean, understanding chess, I mean, first the aim is to teach you how the pieces move, and
Yeah.
then first move क्या होना चाहिए, how to play. There can be many first moves. I mean, this is also a first move which is very common. लोग घोड़े भी चलते हैं, ये पॉन भी चलते हैं, ये भी चलते हैं, but we'll come to that later, moves and all. But Abhi, the point is to make you understand how the pieces move. So pawn movements are need to be very careful because वो पीछे नहीं आ सकते and it can only capture diagonally. So Abhi, this pawn is at a deadlock and this is an obstacle. Both the pawns stand as an obstacle to each other. Now the only place for this pawn, अगर इसको चलना है, it has to capture one of your opponent's pieces. And of course, if you go and fight a war, you don't kill your own army, so you can't kill your own pieces, which is very obvious. So yes, हम on person बाद में सिखाएगा, guys, we don't want to get to on person now. Good evening teacher. भाई I'm teacher नहीं, हम streamer है यार. Sparks, we are streaming, teaching नहीं चल रहा है. So G3 goblet, बढ़िया. So now pawns के बाद let us come to the most easy piece, that is the rook. ये जो रुक है, ये जो the rook can only move in vertical lines or horizontal lines, that is the sleeping line or the standing line. And bas, that is it. I mean, the rook can either go this way or that way. It cannot move in diagonals. I mean, both the rooks and ये rook, the initial position is there, ये आगे पीछे आ सकता है. Let's say at some point you move your rook ahead, ये पीछे भी आ सकता है. So a rook can move in all directions. And one more important part is that what are the obstacles for this rook? Let's say कि if you have a pawn here and a black pawn somewhere here, and if you have a bishop over here, let's say this is like something, so ये rook can move to these squares and ये इसको खाली काट सकता है. You cannot capture your own pawn, जैसे कि I said. So even a rook cannot jump over other pieces.
And how many moves maximum?
नहीं, so I mean that is what I was saying, that pawn एक या दो बार चल सकता है. There is no limitation on the rook. I mean, let's say your rook is over here and there is no bishop over here, so this rook can go to any of these squares. I mean,
Oh,
all the green arrow marks or the green circles that I'm drawing here, abhi ye rook can go to any of these squares. Just imagine that, there are some kings here. So abhi these are all the possible squares where the rook can move to. And your rook cannot jump over your pieces. So let's say if this pawn was here, then the rook's movement would have been restricted to these squares, because ये जो सारे squares है, I mean I don't know how to add. Okay, I can add red marks. So ये जो red colors के circles है, the rook cannot go to these four no squares. ये सारे square में रुक जा सकता है, because your pawn is acting as an obstacle to your rook.
and had there been a black pawn instead of
अगर
my
यहाँ पे
pawn?
black pawn होता, let's say, so in this position you can still not go to any of these blue squares. You can go to these squares and you can capture this pawn over here. So I mean, let's say you can go and capture this pawn. So that is the only difference over here. Amok bhai बोल रहे, I am 220 elo, how to improve? Amok bhai, I know you are 2200 elo, you are very strong, so I have no tips for you. So the rook can capture this pawn. Yes, you can capture. Correct, chess brilliancy. You can capture this pawn, or you can move to any of these squares. So the rook movement is like one of the most simple pieces in chess, because rook का जो movement है, it is like this. ये pawn को यहाँ से हटा देते एक बार. I mean, this is the simplest rook movement, either standing line or sleeping line. As simple as that. And if you have an opponent piece blocking it, then you can either capture it, and if your own piece is there, then it is acting as a road blocker, store stop, जो भी बोलते हैं उसको, and you can't move on top of that. So that's how the rook moves. Harsh Adit's bhai, hello. So now the next piece, I mean, if you have any questions in rook.
Rook is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, rook is the easiest. Now we come to another piece that is also very easy, which is the bishop. So let's say the bishop is over here, and we saw that there are three directions. One was the sleeping line and the standing line, and the third one was diagonals. So the bishop can only move in diagonals, and it can move any number of squares. So ये जो bishop है, it can move only in diagonals, and ये भी आगे पीछे दोनों जा सकता है.
Okay.
And just like the rook, it cannot jump over your own pieces. And there are two bishops. I mean, if you see the bishops, and since it can only move in diagonals, so a bishop of its color can only stay on the same color that is. For example, you have a light square bishop and a dark square bishop. So a dark square bishop can only move on the dark squares, and a light square bishop can only move on the light squares. Teach अनपसॉ क्लिप्स भाई हम सब सिखाएंगे. I mean, it takes some time. ऑन पसॉ में हम बाद में आएंगे, because we want to first teach the basics, हर piece move कैसे करता है, and we'll move to all these concepts like castling, on पसॉ a bit later. So that is how the bishop moves. For example, let's say you have a bishop here, and you have an opponent rook over here, and you have your pawns, let's say here and here. So in such a case, the possible squares for the bishop are, you can either move here, 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 or you can capture this rook. And all these squares जो blue में है, the bishop cannot go to these squares, because this pawn acts as a blocker to this h7 square. And I will now start denoting the squares with the notations, ताकि because even you need some practice, that if I say this blue colored square, generally what happens is notations is very important. So I know this was like the first time you've come across notations, but I mean, if you want to get better at chess or you want to learn chess, the notations are very important and it should be on your fingertips. For example, let's say if I say E8, so you should know that E8 is a light square, not a dark square. Similarly,
Hmm.
F8, it's a dark square. Like you should have a visualization of the board in your mind. That is something very important. So in this case, this bishop जो यहाँ पे E4 में है, it can go to all these squares that are colored green, and the blue squares, that is the B1, B7, A8 and H7, it cannot go because ये जो bishop है पीछे भी आ सकता है, but the C2 pawn over here is blocking the bishop from coming to B1. This G6 pawn over here is blocking your bishop from going to H7, and आप ये rook को काट सकते हो, but you cannot go to B7 or A8 because this rook, while you can capture it, it is also acting as a road blocker.
Hmm.
So bishop में बस यही चीज है that it can move diagonally.
And again, unlimited moves.
Yeah, it can move any number of squares, but it cannot jump over the piece.
Understood.
So any questions when it comes to
इनका
bishops?
recap कर लेते हैं.
हाँ
So the first is pawn.
हाँ
The pawn can only go straight, it cannot come back.
yeah
And base position se it can go 2 places up. And
yes
after that, only 1 place up.
yeah
And third point, it cannot capture straight, it has to capture diagonally.
right, perfect.
Okay.
So for example,
Then,
let's say you have a pawn here and the black pawn is here and it has a bishop here and let's say a rook here. So this pawn cannot capture the black pawn. It can capture one of these two pieces.
okay.
तो diagonally capture करते हैं और आगे सिर्फ move कर सकते हैं provided there is no other piece of yours or your opponent's in front of the pawn.
इसमें I think the smarter than this position, what you have done abhi, I think the smarter thing will be to capture the bishop.
No,
Because
we
the
will come
bishop
to
will
that later.
capture it
No, we will
later.
come to that later. What is the smarter
Last
choice and not?
time.
Because all these pieces जो मैं बोल रहा हूँ, they have a value, and I'll get to the value at the end once you know how all the pieces move.
Okay.
So this was the pawn movement. Next we did was the rook movement.
So rook can only go straight or it can go left, right, whatever. So sleeping
Yeah,
line and standing line, no
exactly.
diagonal.
And
And
again, the rook can go any number of squares, and it cannot jump over any piece. अगर आपका पीस बीच में आता है then it can, let's say there is a pawn over here, then these two squares, मैं कोई और कलर कर लेता हूँ, the blue squares it cannot go to, and if there's a knight over here, let's say black knight, then ये blue squares में नहीं जा सकता है. You either capture this or you go to any of these squares, the green squares.
mm-hmm.
So that is the rook, and then we saw the bishop. Bishop was also like the rook, जो खाली diagonally move कर सकता है any number of squares, and once again the bishop cannot jump over other pieces. So if there is your piece over here, then ये दो pawn, I mean ये दो square में नहीं जा सकता है, and if there is a black piece over here, then इसमें नहीं जा सकता है, but you can capture this piece. You cannot capture your own piece, but you can capture your opponent's piece. It's just like a war, you can imagine a war going on.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the three pieces. I mean, rook and bishop we have learned. So rook can go standing sleeping line and bishop can go diagonally. Now we come to the most powerful piece in chess. That is the queen. Now queen is basically a combination of the rook and bishop.
Okay.
So basically the queen can go in all directions and again any number of squares. The reason why it is the most powerful is because it can go in all directions. So I mean you can see maybe it might look थोड़ा बहुत सारे arrows हो गए and stuff, but if you break it down to, let's say, how a rook moves, imagine this was a rook. So let's say if I place all the rooks over here, right? So okay, by mistake मैंने queen के ऊपर rook डाल दिया. So imagine if this was a rook, it could have gone to all these squares. This is how a rook moves, right?
Mm.
And if you merge it with the bishop,
Mm-hmm.
so it can go basically in all directions. वो स्टैंडिंग लाइन स्लीपिंग लाइन में भी जा सकता है एंड वो डायगनली भी जा सकता है एंड इट कैन मूव एनी नंबर ऑफ स्क्वायर्स एंड जस्ट लाइक any other piece जो हमने सीखा rook and bishop it cannot jump over pieces so queen is the strongest because it can go in all directions and any number of squares. So if I had to put a queen let's say over here and if I had to mark all the squares जहाँ पे this queen can move so it would be first a sleeping line just like a rook, then a standing line, this is how a rook moves, and then I go like how a bishop would have moved.
Hmm. Understood.
Hello सबको hello guys. So let me clear this. And once again, let's say if my queen is here, you have some knight over here. Let's say you have some bishop over here. You have some black knight over here, and let's say a black pawn over here. So the queen cannot go to these squares because when you look at this diagonal, तो ये घोड़ा बीच में आ रहा है. You can capture this knight, but you can't go to this g6 and h7 square. I mean ये g6 and h7 में let me put it yellow, maybe आपको दिख नहीं रहा होगा, but these two squares it cannot go, and similarly these two squares, that is the g2 and the h1 square, the green squares it cannot go there.
Okay.
Because these two pieces are there, you can capture any of them, but you cannot jump on top of them.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean that's it. Like queen is basically a combination of the rook and bishop. So if you have learned how the rook and bishop move, then the queen becomes very simple, and the queen is the strongest because you see it can cover more squares in a chessboard, like unlike any other piece.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have any questions on the queen, you can shoot.
Nee, I'm good for now.
And now we come to the king. The reason I did not say the king is the most powerful piece is because जो king है, if it dies you lose the game, and the king can also go in all directions. ये भी आपका सारे direction में जा सकता है, like standing, sleeping, diagonally, all lines, but there is only one catch, that the king can only move one square unlike the queen. So while the queen can go any number of squares in any direction, the king can also go to all squares, and the best way to understand the king is that वो अपने बगल में एक square in any direction it can control. So the king can go to this square, standing line, sleeping line, horizontal, diagonal सब जा सकता है, but only one square. So I mean, if you have any questions on king, because king में और कुछ बताने को है नहीं, and
Mm-hmm.
the king can capture any piece apart from the king. I mean, let's say black has a king, there will always be a one square gap between the kings. कभी भी ये king के पास नहीं आ सकता है. I mean, this is not possible in chess. You cannot capture a king. वो king checkmate होता है. We will come to the checkmate part and all later, but you cannot capture a king. You can give checks, and then there is the concept of checkmate, but you cannot capture the king. So uh, if your king dies, and the aim of chess is to checkmate your opponent's king. I mean that is the aim in a chess game in a nutshell. So king is, I mean, it is the most valuable in terms of कि आप अपने your king cannot die in a chess game, and it can only move one square.
So basically, you have to protect the king.
Yes, I mean that is the way, that either you protect your king or you checkmate the king. Illegal move बोल रहे संकल्प. Yes, castling में हम बाद में आएंगे, chess brilliancy. Castling on Passau, all this will come later. First, we need to understand how the pieces move. And now we come to the final piece, that is the knight. And if you recall, जब मैंने सारे piece बोले, I mean, when we spoke about the rook, we spoke about the bishop, and we spoke about the queen, there was one thing common in all of these. The one thing common was that these pieces cannot jump over other pieces. अगर आपको याद होगा, I had said that that if your rook is here and your white pawn is here,
Hmm.
the rook cannot go to these squares. It cannot jump over the piece.
Hmm.
So knight, I call it the most tricky, the tricky piece in chess, because firstly, knight is the only piece that can jump over other pieces. And जो नाइट का मूवमेंट है, दिस इज एक्चुअली द टफेस्ट पार्ट टू टीच, बिकॉज नाइट का मूवमेंट इज द मोस्ट ट्रिकी. अभी नाइट कैसे चलता है, लेट अस ब्रेक इट डाउन. आई डोंट नो हाउ डू आई टेल यू हाउ अ नाइट मूव्स. अगर आप देखोगे, देयर वाज अ फेमस मीम जब सम टॉप चेस प्लेयर्स आए थे चेसकॉम में, तो दे हैड आस्क्ड द प्लेयर दैट कैन यू टेल मी हाउ द नाइट मूव्स, एंड एवरीवन स्टार्टेड लाफिंग. सो नाइट, अगर हम हिंदी में बोले तो ढाई कदम चलता है, 2.5. So now does it move 2.5? I mean, let me break it down to you simple. So when I say two, so two squares can be, like in a standing line or sleeping line. So you count one, two on each sides, or let's break it into the sleeping line first. So when I say two, these are the two squares, right? One, two, one, two. And then
Hmm.
हमें गिनना है half. So half क्या होता है? Let's say if you are going in a sleeping line, so the half will be one square up down up down. So if I have to put pawns on the squares where the knight can move, these are the four squares. And how we arrived at these four squares is like two and then half, two and then half. No, people say कि वो L shape में चलता है. That is also true. No, I don't know how I explain how a knight moves, but it is like basically 2.5. So like it's like, no, you can say it's a reverse L. अगर आप ऐसे देखो तो it's a L shape like this.
Hmm.
तो basically knights कैसे चलता है? And when you look at the standing line, यहाँ पे भी what you do is you can count one two. So one two one two, and then half will be right left. So basically, how if I had to teach someone how a knight moves, so how I would show it is that basically you first draw a line like this, a sleeping line. You count two squares to the right and left of the place where the knight is kept. So one two over here, one two over here. And because it's a sleeping line, तो आपका जब one two आ गया, then you go half in a straight way. So one square to the up and down. जैसे आपने ये left right किया. So when you go two squares to the right, then up and down जहाँ पे ये दो pawn set है. Two squares, one two up and down जहाँ पे ये दोनों pawn set है. Now when you look at the standing line, one two over here, one two over here, and because it is one two to the up and down, then you go right and left.
Hmm.
So right and left, यहाँ पे भी right and left.
Okay.
So that is
So
how the knight moves.
every time it has to move 2.5 squares.
Always, always. I mean, see, ये जो मैंने pawns यहाँ पे रखे हैं ना, these are the squares where the knight can move. L shape is the best. सब लोग chat में बोल रहे हैं L shape is the best how to teach how a knight moves. So basically 2.5 आप समझो या L समझो. So all the possible L's that you can draw from here. I mean, let's say ये एक L हो गया. This is an inverted L. Now this is also an L. So ये सारे L shapes है how the knight moves.
Hmm.
Teach her Lucena. बढ़िया भाई. So and one more important point, if you notice, ये जो knight है, this is sitting on a white square. That is a light square. And
Hmm.
all the moves, the possible squares that can go, all of these, if you notice, they are dark squares. अगर आप देखो, all these squares, all of these are black squares or dark squares. So a knight will always move in the square opposite its color. And आपको जैसे सीखना है, L सीखना है, 2.5 सीखना है. I mean, this is the trickiest how to teach, how a knight moves. So basically, I mean, if I had to tell you how it moves, it is like 2.5. मैं आपको ये बोलूंगा that that you count two squares, left and right, that is the sleeping line, and two squares in a standing line. And if it's a sleeping line, that is left right, तो आप one up one down करके कर सकते हो. And if you're going straight in a standing line, then right left right left.
Hmm.
For night it is easy to understand. Kulkan, I don't know how it is easy to understand night, वो तो नंदिनी बता पाएगी. I mean,
तो मेरा एक क्वेश्चन था एक्चुअली. सो नाउ सपोज देयर इज another piece.
yeah, I was about to come to that. So यहाँ पे let's say black has pieces all over, I mean, let's say there's a king here, there is a knight here, there is a bishop here, there is a rook here. Okay, I mean, you can have pieces anywhere. Okay, let me not put the knight. I mean, let's say that there are pieces, हर जगह में piece है, and still the knight can go to all these pieces जहाँ पे white pawn है. So the point is that I mean this has become too कुछ crazy हो गया है. So let me put a knight over here. Let me put a black bishop over here, and let me put a black knight over here. And this knight can still go 1 2, like no, it can still jump over this piece. So जैसे मैंने बोला, you count 1 2 in the sleeping line. So you count 1 2 over here, you count 1 2 over here, and then up down, down only one square, up down. So if I have to place pawns over here, the knight can still go to all of these squares. No, like it can go here because knight is the only piece that can jump. So
Okay.
that's why when I was teaching the other pieces, I made sure to include this point that the other pieces or your piece, it acts as a road blocker, कि आप अपने पीस के आगे नहीं चल सकते. बट यहाँ पे इवन लेट्स से इफ यू हैड अ वाइट बिशप ओवर हियर, द नाइट कैन स्टिल मूव टू दीस स्क्वायर्स एज लॉन्ग एज देयर इज नो पीस ओवर हियर. अगर यहाँ पे आपका रुक है, देन इट कैन नॉट गो हियर, देन दिस बिकम्स अ ब्लू, जो मैंने ब्लू हाईलाइट किया है, द नाइट कैन नॉट गो हियर. And if there is a black if there's a black rook over here, then you can capture this, but you cannot place the knight over here. I mean, this becomes a capture. The knight
Mm-hmm.
can then only go to these two squares.
Okay.
Christmas tree puzzle by Saurabh. Badhiya bhai. So I mean, this is how a knight moves. I mean, for knight you might be feeling that it is slightly tricky and stuff, but I mean, with time aap seekh jaoge knight. It is like no, it is not that tricky. So maybe you know what, since this was the last piece that was left to be covered. I mean, if you notice, मैंने king, pawn, queen, rook, bishop सब पहले करा दिया. I purposely kept knight for the end because I knew that knight was, you know, could have been a bit tricky. So I mean, for the knight, maybe we can do some test or something to understand, to be sure कि आप सीखे हो कि नहीं, because night is actually something जो मुझे, I don't know मैं कैसे सिखाऊं how a night moves honestly, and I tried my best. I don't know whether it was helpful or not. So I mean, if you have
I
any,
think it's clear हुआ है. You did a very good job. But yeah, I think और practice करते करते it will get better registered.
yeah, so I mean, if you have any questions on how the night moves, then feel free to ask. Yes,
नहीं समझ
test
में
लो, e लो, खेल खेल कर आ जाएगा. यस स्कूल, टेस्ट लो. अरे हम टेस्ट थोड़ी लेने वाले, हम टीचर थोड़ी है जो यहाँ पे टेस्ट लेने बैठे हैं भाई. But if you have any questions on any of the piece movements, I mean, this is how the board is set up जो हमने पहले बोला. So first of all, the first question is that is it clear how the board is set up? I mean, all the squares over here first of all.
Yeah, that is एकदम clear.
So I mean, if all the क्या बोलते हैं, the squares are clear, that the notations of each square is clear, that is
Mhm.
good. I mean, that is something that you need to be very clear at. For example, let's say I say this square, and you should be clear that this is c5, no, c
Mhm.
and 5. Let's say if I point this square, g5, no, like this is something that should be very clear. And also, let's say if I say e4, it should be clear that this is a light square, that
Hmm.
the vision, no, you should visualize the board very clearly, that that the bottom left square, that is the a1 square, is always a black square, and your right side h1 is always a white square. If you visualize it, is it like this, that left from, like, I mean, my left, that that a1 square bottom left and bottom right is black white, तो आपको chess board बहुत अच्छे से visualize हो जाएंगे.
So
And
why is it important to know the color? कि
no,
कौन
because
सा
I
black?
mean, you cannot place a board where your a1 square is white. I mean, फिर the entire thing gets messed up, right? Then it's not chess, कुछ और हो जाता है. So I mean, before you play any game, you should have the board in order, right? So the bottom right square is supposed to be H, and यहाँ पे because ये LHS का board है, you can see A B C D written over here. बहुत सारे board में this is not written also. So in that case, you should know that that the bottom left square, which is the A1 square, is always a black square, and the bottom right square, which is H1, is always a white square. And I have also seen this in some inter club tournaments जहाँ पे people कभी कभी board ऊपर नीचे set कर लेते हैं. The king is placed here and the queen is placed here. No, there have been these situations that have happened at club level, not at the top level, obviously. So it is very important to understand these basic points that the bottom right square is white, the queen keeps her color. I mean, बाकी में तो आपको कोई दिक्कत नहीं होगी, rook, knight, bishop, how they are placed. And there are two bishops, dark square bishop, light square bishop. And because ये diagonally चलता है, so the bishop will always stay in its own color. I mean, this light square bishop can never suddenly go from here to here because ये सिर्फ diagonally चल सकता है. And उसके बाद we learnt about how each piece moves. I mean, pawn, rook, knight, bishop. And इसका भी practice है. I'll tell you after the stream, no, once we end the stream, and how you can practice ki how each piece moves. And बाकी हमने और क्या सीखा? I mean, I think we just learned about the notations
Yeah.
and how
The
to set
name
up a
of the
board.
pieces and the movement.
Yeah. And before I end the stream, I had told you that each piece has a value. So the value is जो pawns होते हैं, which you said frontline defense. So these pawns are like soldiers, and they have the minimum value, which is only 1 point. And ये लगता है that it's only 1 point, but later you will realize that pawns are also very important, because if this pawn reaches the last square, then it can turn into any other piece. वापस queen भी बन सकती है. But we will learn about these things later. I mean, no, ये आपको लगता है that the pawn is only one square, but each pawn is valuable, because अगर ये pawn last rank में पहुंच जाता है, I mean, let's say in a chess game you are able to get this pawn till this square, so then you can bring back any other piece apart from the king. You can never have two kings in a game, but you can have all other pieces. You can have multiple. Let's say you see only one queen on the board. There are potential 8 other queens over here, so you can have 9 queens on a chessboard.
Wow.
So I mean,
So is the aim of the pawn to reach the end line of the opposite side, or is
no.
it to take the as many?
The aim of chess is to checkmate your opponent's king. But yes, if your pawn gets to the last rank, like for example, if your white pawn gets to the 8th rank, we learned about files and rank. जो column होते हैं, they are known as files, and जो rows होते हैं, 1, 2, 3, 4, these are known as ranks. So in simple terms, if your white pawn gets to the last row, that is the 8th row, then it can become any other piece. And similarly, if the black pawn gets to the first row over here, so black can also make any other piece. But these concepts we will come later. So basically, हमने सीखा pawn movements and all the piece movements, and the pawn is 1 point. Then you have the knights and the bishops, which is known as the minor pieces. इसकी value है 3 points. So both the knights and the bishops are worth 3 points. So many people ask that which is stronger, knight or bishop. It depends from position to position, but value दोनों की 3 है. Now we come to the major pieces, that is the rook. The rooks are worth 5 points. So if you remember, जब हमने एक question पूछा था, you said that it is like when we were seeing how the pawn moves, that ये pawn can capture either of the pieces and it cannot move forward. So you said that it makes sense to take this bishop. So उस time पे we had not told the value of the pieces.
Right.
But now you know that the bishop is 3 points and the rook is 5
5.
points. So unless there is something that like let's say कोई reason say you cannot take the bishop, or taking the bishop is bad, so in a situation where you are able to take both the pieces without your position getting worse, you will always prefer to take the rook, because the rook is worth 5 points compared to the bishop, which is worth 3 points.
Correct.
So knight and bishop is 3 points, rook is 5 points, pawn is 1 point, the queen is 9 points. So and it makes a lot of sense why it is 9 points, because when we saw the queen, we saw that the queen was a combination of the rook and bishop. If you see how the queen moves, I mean, while the rooks can only move in standing line and sleeping lines, and the bishops can move diagonally, the queen can move in all directions. I mean, sorry with the arrows, but queen can move in all directions. Straight, standing line, sleeping line, and diagonally. So queen का value is 9 points. I mean, 5 plus 3 is 8. अभी इसकी value 9 क्यों है? We have to ask the people who invented this point system. So queen is 9 points, the pawn is 1 point, rook is 5, knight and bishop is 3, and any guesses what's the value of the king?
10.
No, the king doesn't have any value because अगर आपका king मर जाता है then the game ends. So
Okay.
the king is priceless.
So is chess a game of points, or is it the or so
No,
person with the maximum points they win, or the
no,
person
no.
who
So
takes
in
the
chess, the aim is that you have to checkmate your opponent's king. It's, you can imagine chess as a war. Like,
game?
it's a war between two sides,
Mhm.
and the aim of no, like, let's imagine if you're going in a war, your aim is to capture is to defeat the other side's king. So the
Hmm.
aim of chess is to checkmate your opponent's king, and points क्या होता है? I mean, each piece is assigned some value, and this value is basically for evaluation. Like, when you're playing a game of chess, you have to evaluate certain things that if you're giving up some material, what is the points, what is the value of that material जो आप sacrifice कर रहे हो, what are you getting in return. So for example, let's say if this is the position, let's say knight यहाँ पे है and I play the pawn over here and you are black, so you would want to save this knight and not no like not do something like this, because अगर ऐसा होता है, so white has lost the pawn which is 1 point and black has lost the knight which is 3 points. So that is where the value system and the point system come in. So let's say if you're doing a bad trade like this, so you are down with on material because we know that the knight is stronger than the pawn, and you will understand that as जैसे कि हम as and slowly हम chess सीखेंगे, so you'll understand that why this knight is stronger than the pawn and stuff, why the rook is considered stronger than a knight and a bishop and stuff, all that you will understand gradually. But the aim of today was just to make you understand how the pieces move, and basically ki how a board is set up. Just to this was just like an introduction to chess. 64 squares hote hai, the notion that how to know how you can notation of each square, and just knowing how the board is set up, the value of each piece, how this piece is moved. And I mean, that was the aim that I had thought for today. So
Yeah, it's pretty clear. थोड़ा
like
आई
आप
थिंक ज़्यादा टू मच इन्फॉर्मेशन हो गया है।
हाँ,
सो
that's
मेबी
that's
वंस वी
why.
प्रैक्टिस या
That's why I said that that this is going to be a short stream, and this will just be like an introductory stream to the game and how the pieces move. So nice lesson. अरे thank you भाई, nice है कि नहीं वो इनसे पूछने दो ना भाई.
नहीं, मुझे तो बहुत अच्छा लगा लेसन आज का। आई थिंक इट्स अ गुड इंट्रोडक्शन टू द गेम। अब कितना रजिस्टर हुआ है वो तो आफ्टर प्रैक्टिस सेशन ओनली वी विल गेट टू नो।
Yeah, Virat, she's a friend who wanted to learn chess. Welcome Jessica. 1 + 1 = 3 and 5 + 3 = 9. बढ़िया भाई. अभी आप मैथ्स क्लासेस ले लो भाई, हमें भी मैथ्स क्लासेस दे दो. But yes, I mean, this was the purpose, and and like once I end the stream, I will also show you that how you can practice the piece movements and stuff. Like, I'll show you how to set up an account and stuff. Like there are chess platforms online. There is Li Chess. There is chess.com. There are multiple platforms where you can, you can play chess. There's a lot of learning material. Chess Billions is saying, hope Nandini becomes next WGM. Please tell her. बोल दिया भाई, बोल दिया chess brilliancy. I hope that you become a WGM, and the day you become a WGM, don't forget to thank chess freaks.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
I don't know if I will become in this lifetime, but you never say never.
Again, no, obviously, bhai, never say never. So, I mean, with that, I will end the stream now. And thank you so much, guys, for tuning in.
Thank you,
Ha,
Minal, for the lovely session. And if there's any beginner watching this, then guys, stay tuned. I'm sure with Mrinal, you guys will become pro chess players.
Thank you so much, yeah. So, yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope that that उनको समझ आया कि नहीं मुझे नहीं पता, but I hope आप लोगों को समझ आया हो. And if you have any questions, you can आप चैट में लिख सकते हो या आप कमेंट्स में लिख सकते हो आफ्टर द स्ट्रीम इज ओवर. सो थैंक यू गाइस, एंड हो सकता है मैं रात को फिर से चेस खेलने के लिए स्ट्रीम कर लूँ. आई डोंट नो माय प्लान्स एट नाइट, बट मेरा हाई, मेरा 2 पोजीशन सेकंड। ओके, कांग्रेट्स खोपकर गेमर, आई रिमेंबर कल आपने बोला था यू आर प्लेइंग अ टूर्नामेंट, सो कांग्रेट्स ऑन कमिंग सेकंड। एंड गाइस, आई विल स्ट्रीम एट नाइट, रात को थोड़ा बुलेट खेलेंगे आज, सो मे बी मिडनाइट चेस करेंगे आज, बिकॉज हमारी मर्जी यार, हमें जब चेस खेलना है हम तब स्ट्रीम करते हैं। सो
Mrinal, I must tell you, you're a very patient and detailed oriented streamer. I
अरे
won't
थैंक
call
यू
you
सो मच
teacher.
दोस्तों, इसी बात पे आप लाइक कर देना स्ट्रीम को, एंड डोंट फॉरगेट टू सब्सक्राइब इफ यू आर न्यू।
Please